All right, well, welcome to Live from my drum room. My guest is my old friend and music industry legend, Colin Schofield. Colin's 40 plus year career in the music industry includes senior management and vice president positions at Premier Drums, Zildjian Cymbals, Gretsch, and currently Jody Jazz Mouthpieces. In 1989, Colin recruited me to work for Zildjian and was a great mentor to me and others. I learned a lot from him, and I owe him a huge debt of thanks for helping nurture my career in the drum industry. Well, last week we reconnected at PASIC, and it was a pleasure to spend time with Colin and our mutual friend and former Zildjian colleague, Paul Francis, whom you all know from Royal Cymbals. And today we'll talk about Colin's long and successful career and the impact he made at Zildjian and other companies in the industry. We'll no doubt share a few war stories along the way, so come along for the ride and please welcome my dear old friend and music industry legend, Colin Schofield.
Yeah,
Perfect.
nothing like old guys struggling with technology to entertain
uh,
people.
and I'm absolutely no help trying to help you figure things out. And there's speaking of Paul Francis, who I mentioned in the intro, the Cats, of which he is one of us. Cats. So, all right,
He's listening in. Hey,
he's
Paul.
listening in, as is Charlie Drayton.
Oh, my man, Mr.
Yeah,
Drayton.
Mr. Drayton.
Mhm.
Thank you, Colin, for taking time to be here today. Too, I know you're actually at work, and I appreciate you taking time. That's the beauty of being the boss there, that you can just get together with an old friend and
Well, it all works out in the wash. So I
yeah,
don't really work regular hours. You work when you need to work, and that can be the whole weekend sometimes.
yeah,
So
yeah.
especially dealing with international customers, but no, wouldn't miss it for the world. Again, thank you very much for inviting me on. I've been watching how your show, if I can call it a show, has been growing and growing and growing, and watched many episodes myself, and been
Thank you.
fascinated by some of the stories and interviews. And it's truly it's a great honor to participate and be on myself. And I say
Thank you, Colin.
I was really upset that I couldn't participate in the one for the anniversary for the American Drummers, no, for the Buddy Rich Memorial Scholarship
Yeah,
concert.
yeah. I know. Me
You
too.
know,
I was so, and you know, you were
but
missed by everybody.
that's the way things work. I still have some stories about that, and of course, I had a full head of hair and a 32-inch waist before that concert, and
I remember. Yeah,
I put a lot of miles on me that one, boy,
I know it
but
did. I know
all
it
for a
did.
good cause.
Yeah, it really was. That was an amazing event, and I'm
It
glad you
was.
mentioned it because it's definitely in my notes of what I would think to be your career highlights. Certainly at Zildjian, that was a big one, and that was and again, for everybody watching, I did this episode a year ago to commemorate the 35th anniversary of the Buddy Rich Memorial Concert in Los Angeles, which was the second one, the one that
Yeah.
our friend Rob Wallace, who's watching right now, videotaped for Hudson or for DCI back in the day. And Colin, unfortunately, was on a flight back from China and missed it by a day. And I reached out to all the guys that were involved and said, and Kathy Rich, and said, can we just push it a day? And Dave Weckl was in India, and
Yeah. No,
Steve Gadd was somewhere,
I'm
and it
I'm
just
the last person on the list you needed to worry
no, but
about. So.
but you were very
But it
important.
was a great show. I mean, I enjoyed it.
Oh,
I
thank
say
you.
my recollection of certain things is a little bit different, but generally speaking, I say it was an incredible event. It really was.
It really was. It really was. Well, let's jump in and talk about young Colin Schofield, the drummer, and kind of which I'm guessing is what this is what got you being a drummer is what got you into the business to begin with. I think for all of us, that's that. And this is obviously a picture of you, and I think it says 1982, so it's not a teenage Colin, but You're a drummer. You started off as a drummer and played in bands, and you grew up in London, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
no. I say I describe myself now as a recovering drummer, but yeah, I mean, at one time, that was really all that I was interested in. I'd always loved music from being a toddler. My mum loved music. There was always music on in the house, and I think I've told you this story, but my grandparents lived across the street from Abbey Road Studios. So we could literally look out of their window and
Oh my
see who was
gosh.
ever going in and out. We were high enough so you could see over the wall. So we could literally see who was going in and out of Abbey Road Studios. We'd go there for Sunday lunch every Sunday, and we'd regularly see the Beatles coming in and out of there.
Oh my
They'd
God.
be sort of like a bunch of commotion, and but you they would kind of like drive in behind the brick walls, but you could see them coming in and out. Now, at that age, I was, didn't necessarily mean much to me. My older sister would be freaking out and getting excited, but we were right across the street from Abbey Road Studios, and my mum did take my sister and I to the Beatles Christmas concert at the Hammersmith Odeon in 1965, when I would have been
Wow.
5 years old, which I think
Yeah.
was one of the last shows that they did. I think it was on their last
Yeah.
tour. I'm not a Beatles expert, but and I remember them coming out on stage in the big sweater from Help. You remember the movie Help, where all four of
Absolutely.
them are wearing a one
Yeah.
giant sweater with eight arms?
Yeah.
And that I remember them coming out on stage wearing that sweater, and then, to be perfectly honest, it was just people screaming, and
Right.
5-year-old Colin didn't really enjoy that very much, and it ended up with like my mum kind of taking me out because I was, it was just girls screaming, including my
Yeah.
sister, who was just, there was just lots and lots of people screaming. But so music was always a part of me. I remember like Alice Cooper was probably my first great love. Totally got into the Alice Cooper band. I loved all their stuff. And then I think probably most seriously was Emerson, Lake and Palmer.
Mm.
So
Hmm.
my first drum hero was Carl Palmer. I
Yeah.
had
Yeah.
everything that Emerson, Lake and Palmer did. I was seriously a paid up member of the Emerson, Lake and Palmer Appreciation Society, which was a thing back then.
Yeah. I believe
And
it.
I saw them live at Wembley, 1974, on the Welcome Back, My Friends to the Show That Never Ends. Where by that time Carl had the 2.5 ton solid stainless steel drum kit, and the
Yeah.
two
Yeah. Yeah.
gongs and the timpani, and he'd, ring the bell with his teeth and everything. He was my he was my hero. I mean, I absolutely worshipped him.
Yeah.
And but I got into playing the drums. It was actually a school friend of mine. I must have been about 12 or 13 years old. A guy, his name was Tim Leon. I owe it all to him. He had a Ludwig, beautiful Ludwig green sparkle kit. And he lived a few doors away from me, and he invited me over. He said, "I've got the kit set up, come on." And he taught me just like a basic beat,
Rock. Yeah. Just a yeah backbeat.
most simple thing. And I picked it up, very quickly. And it was like, oh my gosh, I can play an instrument. And I had some friends at high school. One of them kind of, knew someone who owned a bass guitar, and there was a guitar player, and that was it for me. The first time I actually was playing with other people, and people would come and listen to us. I mean, that was like I was addicted at that point.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
all I wanted to do was, I became obsessed with the drums, and then eventually saved up enough to buy that blue Beverly drum kit, which I bought with my bar mitzvah money, much to my parents' chagrin. But and yeah, that was kind of everything that um, yeah. By that point, I'd already started working for Premiere, so I'd augmented it with some other drums. But
Yeah. I was
I
going to
I
ask you
have
that. Okay. Yeah.
so, but just to finish kind of what really was the turning point though for me was, again, 1974, Emerson, Lake and Palmer kind of went into hiatus, and they kind of disappeared for a while. And another friend of mine, Mr. Dave Feld, I remember him very well. Was a very good friend at the time. He had a copy of the Mahavishnu Orchestra Birds of Fire,
Mm.
and he either lent me his or I went out and bought a copy of it because I was so obsessed with Emerson, Lake and Palmer. It's like if there was no new Emerson, Lake and Palmer music, I didn't know what to listen to. And and I remember listening to Mahavishnu, listening to Birds of Fire, and like the first time I played it, I thought, oh, this is just noise. I don't understand it, and I put it away. And then a couple of weeks later, kind of played it again. And I don't know how many listens it took, but I remember there was one day when I listened to it, and it was like someone pulled back the curtains, and suddenly it all made sense to me. And yeah, and from that point on, I was like kind of, was totally into what we called at the time jazz rock,
Hmm. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
totally
Yeah.
got into Mahavishnu and Weather Report and Return to Forever and all those drums, all those drummers, Lenny White, Alphonse Mouzon, Narada Michael Walden, Steve Gadd, on all those early 70s jazz rock records were, that was my, life. And Billy, still to this day, I honestly don't think I would be living in the United States, would have gotten the job with Zildjian or any of this if it hadn't have been for the emotion that Billy's playing stirred in me. I mean, I just, I
Yeah.
remember walking up and down Oxford Street in London when Spectrum came out, trying to get a copy of Spectrum, and then and that was it for me. And again, it was actually you know, a bad thing that I listened to Billy as much as I did because, then I was playing in kind of like R&B bands and stuff and trying to play all my, Billy Cobham stuff, which was, completely
Yeah.
inappropriate. So, it
Like you
wasn't
do.
a good
Yeah.
thing to be, but, I got the aviator glasses like him. And, so that photo that you showed, that was me meeting Billy for the first time which was actually at the International Drummers Meeting in Koblenz that they used to
Wow.
have every year in
Yeah.
1984. And I mean, that was, the expression on my face sums it all up because, it was like Billy was, a god to me. I mean, he, still to this day, as he stirs that passion when I listen to those early records. There was nothing like it to me. So,
Well, I
and then,
know.
and again, from getting into that music, then I started to go backwards and got more into, you know, bebop and, all the jazz rockers. They would just talk about, Miles, and so I then got into Miles Davis, and then, Tony Williams, and then, as I say, became all consuming.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I was just going to say when we started working together, when you hired me in '89, we had met years before that, but it was uh, what's the term I'm looking for? Crystal clear.
Serendipity.
Yeah,
Um,
well, that that Billy Cobham was at that time, and certainly today, as you say, was your hero and your biggest influence. And we'd be you and I would be driving into Boston to a show together in your car, and you'd be playing Mahavishnu, and um, and just going, I mean,
yeah,
listen to that,
it's a fair cop.
But let's jump back, or backwards a little bit from meeting Billy in the Zildjian period, but working for Premiere, I that was like your first job in the industry. And what did you do? Was it artist relations? Was it like a bunch of different things that you did for? And this would have been the early 1980s when Premiere was a serious, viable drum brand.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And at the time, they still made everything in that factory in Leicester.
Yeah,
I mean everything. Every part of the drum set and the tune percussion and the timpani.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know, when I first joined them, I had like 2 weeks training where I had to work in the factory. So I would spend like a day at different machines. So there was a day where I was, making they still back then had the slotted, tension rods.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd be on a machine, making tension rods. And then another day, they used to make drum heads, and they used,
Yeah, drum
a
heads.
metal liner instead of glue. And so I did everything within the factory. I mean, so I went to the University of Leicester. I actually graduated at the University of Leicester with a degree in biology, and left that not wanting to have anything to do with biology. But Leicester is where the premier drum company was. The premier factory was in Wixton, not far away. And I just wrote to them out of the blue and just said, hey, I'm, just graduated from university, I have a degree, but, and they were hiring people at that time. And I was the marketing assistant.
Mm.
And my annual salary was £5,000, which translates to about $8,000 a year. But I was the happiest person in the
Yeah.
world. It was a job, and I was working for a drum company.
Yeah. And,
And
you were 22, still living with your parents, probably.
no, well, no,
No,
in
you,
Leicester, I went back into the room that I was
ah,
sharing a room in a house that
I
I had
see.
done as a student.
Gotcha.
and
Okay. So
uh,
you were
and
really out on your own. Yeah.
I was, oh yeah, no, I just stayed, stayed up in Leicester.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, that was a fascinating time. So I was doing photo shoots. One of the things that used to drive me nuts at that time, because it was just, you know, um, it was kind of after the revolution in hardware, where everything became kind of bigger and sturdier and heavier. And
Yeah.
if you're going to have a
Yeah.
double brace stand, we're going to have a triple brace stand.
Uh,
And it
yeah.
started to get crazy. But well, all the premier advertising used to drive me nuts, because they'd have a double bass drum kit, and then they'd have a straight cymbal stand in between the two bass drums instead
Right.
of a boom stand.
Right. Right.
So the kit was set up by someone who, the
Yeah.
photographers set up the kit. The hi hat's like in a weird place and everything, and all those. I used to notice that in all the advertising, and it was so clearly not set up by someone who, kind of played drums.
Hmm.
So I was involved. I did the photo shoots, and so
Yeah.
I was kind of corrected all that. Um, and that was and I was involved in artist relations. So that was when I met our good friend, the very wonderful Mr. Steve White, who
Yes. Yeah.
while I was at Premiere, in fact, I believe that Steve was like the very, very first person I ever gave an endorsement to, which was for
Wow.
for Premiere drums, because the drummer in the Jam, Rick Buckler was a Premiere artist, was a Premiere endorser,
Hmm.
and the guy who handled all their equipment, Dave Little, who's a character, no longer with us. I remember talking to him on the phone, and he's like, "All right, Colin, we got this young kid. He's 16 years or he's 17 years old. His name's Steve White, and he's brilliant. He's really, really good." And that was it. So we kind of made the decision on the spot to give him a premier endorsement, and that's how I met him for the first time, and got to know him very well. And this, one of these things about this business, you make lifelong friends along the way. And still to this day, whenever I go back to London, I always have lunch with Steve. We're messaging each other all the time.
Yeah.
And he's just one of the greatest people
Absolutely.
I've ever met, and feel very fortunate. When he'd come over to Boston, he'd stay at my house. We spent a really funny couple of days down in Provincetown one time, and as I say, we've always been friends. And then another important person was Mel Gaynor.
Mm. Hmm.
from the Simple Minds. Mel became a very, very good friend. And again, this was 1982, 1983. And Mel was, Simple
Vince.
Minds were on top of the world. They were one of the biggest bands in the UK.
Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah.
and that's
Badass
I
drummer.
met
Yeah.
Mel. I gave Mel a premiere endorsement, and that's how I met Mel. But it was my first job in the industry. you know, I remember going meeting Richie Hayward, who I was a huge fan of. He'd come over to play with Robert Plant, and they were
Yeah.
they were rehearsing at Shepperton Studios. I had to bring kit down for him. I met Richie, and I remember that Genesis were rehearsing in kind of like the next. They were doing production rehearsals in the next studio, and I got over and met Chester Thompson, Phil Collins, and could sneak in and watch them rehearsing for the
Yeah.
for the Genesis tour. So it was a dream
What a
dream
great
come
time.
true.
What
I
a
didn't
great
care. I
time.
was only earning $8,000 a year. I was happiest man in the world. Plus, I got to be able to, kind of we used to have a big lone drum area at Premier. So I would often take some of those drums, because I was still gigging at that time. And, so you grab a snare drum here or a couple of other drums and, you know,
Yeah.
check out all this other Premier stuff. So, that was an amazing too.
I think when you hired me, Colin, in 1989, you were paying me about $8,000 a year. Now that I think of it. So, um,
Yeah. Well, that was, the salaries were not my decision at that time.
so,
If
so
if you if
let's
you were if you were earning 8,000, I was earning 8.5. I can tell you.
so let's jump ahead. So it's great to hear that backstory. The how Premiere sort of launched it for you, and then were you recruited to work for the Zildjian UK office? Had they just opened an office? Is
So
that how
the
that?
the Zildjian UK office had just opened, and again, kind of without getting into the details, that was just after the split with Zildjian and Sabian. So
Yeah, yeah.
so very very quick history lesson. Before Avidis passed away, Armin Zildjian was in charge. He ran the US business, and Bob Zildjian ran the international business.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
Bob Zildjian had the relationship with all the international distributors. So when the separation happened, Zildjian opened an international liaison office in London, to manage all the international business. It was originally set up by a gentleman by the name of Rainer Pitwan, but he then our Chris Noblet,
hmm
who was absolutely my mentor. Um, he took over. No, I was actually what happened in September of 1983. Premier had one of their many bankruptcies, when the bank came in and kind of took over, and a lot of the management was let go, including me. So yeah, that was around in September '83. There were a lot of I was made redundant. I was gone. But to explain, so at that time, Zildjian have actually had three distributors in the United Kingdom. So Premier Drums was one of the three Zildjian distributors in the UK.
hmm
So
Yep.
that's how I'd gotten to meet Chris Noblet, and then Chris was making some changes at the Zildjian UK office, and he said I should apply for that job. And then, well, you remember Chris? I remember having an interview with Chris, and I think I might have said 3 words or 4 words, maybe.
Yes.
Remember? And I kind of came out of the interview thinking, oh, I think that went well, and he because he'd already met me, so he knew me, so he'd already made his mind up, before the interview,
Yeah.
and then yeah, before you know it, I moved back down to London, and their office, the Zildjian UK office, was in Windsor, right around the corner from Windsor Castle,
hmm
and um, and I took on I was like international artist relations and promotions manager was my title, and that I
Yeah.
started in October of 1983.
Wow. That's yeah. And so you worked there for a couple of years or not quite, and then
About a year and a half. It was from October 1983 to May 1985.
you were relocated to
So,
Los Angeles.
and then at that time, um, they must have liked what I'd done at the UK office, and then they relocated. They just opened the Zildjian West office,
Yeah.
which back then was on La Cienega Boulevard, right at the
Right.
cross section with Santa Monica Boulevard. And they just opened that office, and they wanted, yeah, they transferred me to come over. It was initially meant to be kind of like only for a year, because I should explain that you know at this time, Sabin weren't really established that much at this time. The cymbal world was Zildjian and Paiste.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
That was really, as a drummer, you had two choices. There was Zildjian and Paiste. There were a couple of other cheap things, and there was these weird K Zildjian things that you might find in a store, cheap. They weren't considered good cymbals back then, and a lot of them weren't at that time.
Yeah.
But it was
Yeah.
really Zildjian and Paiste, and Paiste, had made huge inroads. They were very shrewd. They were very good marketers, and they specifically targeted all the rock drummers. So in the UK, when I started working, yeah, if you're playing jazz, then you play Zildjian cymbals. But if you're playing rock, then you play Paiste. The 2002s were, you know, every all the rock band. I mean, Ian Pace,
Yeah.
obviously John Bonham, um,
And then like
all
Van Halen and these sort of more newer
and
American bands.
absolutely,
Yeah. Yeah.
it was the same. It was the same thing in the US. So
Yeah.
I say, while I was at Zildjian UK, I'd done a very good job in terms of kind of getting more rock drummers and changing the image of Zildjian. So we used to do ads with great drummer Budgie from Susie and the Banshees.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic drummer.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but Zildjian would never have gone close to people like that. And of course Mel Gaynor. I got him onto Zildjian. Mark Brzezicki from Big Country.
Yeah.
He started playing. He was Mark and Mel, like the two biggest names in drumming in the UK at that time.
And
Simple Minds
I'll
were
just
huge.
when those two bands broke, I remember like in '83 or so, they were both Big Country and Simple Minds. They were both playing Paiste cymbals. I remember
Yeah,
seeing the videos
yeah,
on MTV, and
yeah.
you were the guy that. And I just want to say, Colin, that I had made a note, and we're talking about this anyway, but I want to say personally that we have tremendous love and respect for our dear friend Lenny DiMuzio, who will always have a place in history cemented as one of the all-time greats in artist relations. But you, I think, maybe don't get the credit or recognition that you deserve for all the things you did in signing artists in the 80s before you moved up in the company to become vice president of marketing. And I think most of our industry friends know you as the guy that put together the marketing campaigns and product development with Paul Francis. But I mean, looking at some of these rock drummers that you're talking about in the 80s, I mean, it was, with all respect and deference to Lenny, you were the guy that was, and I say this because personally, when I started in '89 and I got to know a lot of these guys like Randy Castillo, they all knew you and they all loved you and they'd all say, "Hey, what's Colin up to? Tell him hi for me," and you kind of, I'd say more than Lenny did, you sort of handed me that baton from the artist side of it. So anyway, I just wanted to make that clarification, as it were.
Yeah. I mean, what I think, one of the things back then was, kind of, it's difficult to put into words really, but but the marketplace had become a lot more competitive,
Yeah.
and it just wasn't in Lenny's nature to kind of approach a drummer who was playing. They were
Yeah.
kind of all, they were all gentlemen in the industry back then.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
They were all gentlemen, and
And no greater
Lenny
gentleman than
would.
Lenny.
It just wasn't in his blood to go to a Peisty endorser and say, hey, what can we do? And have you tried Zildjian? And what he
Yeah.
just that just wasn't in his nature to do
Yep.
that.
Yep.
And the same way, and it was, in the US, it was Steve Edelson, who had been a Zildjian endorser.
I know.
He's in that Zildjian cymbal setup book, and he just started going after everybody.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then even, when Sabian started to get aggressive, and they had the whole, so and so switched campaign. There was a lot of guys that left
Yeah.
Zildjian to play Sabian because they were going to get an ad in Modern Drummer or whatever. And Lenny would just be a gentleman about it. It'd be like, okay, well, I understand that you want to leave, and
Yeah.
and that, and then he would, again, it just wasn't in his nature to be that aggressive and be competitive. Meanwhile, kind of, I'm, on the outside, and again, Lenny was, a legend to me, and I'm thinking, we can't just sit here and have our lunch taken. Though again, I should mention, the fact that with Lenny, he did sign a lot of rock guys.
Oh,
I mean, he
absolutely.
had
Yeah.
Neil
Yeah.
Peart.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
First and foremost,
Yeah.
Lenny had
Tommy
the relationship
Aldridge.
with Neil
Yeah.
Peart, Tommy Aldridge, Lars Ulrich.
Yeah. Yep.
He
Yep.
had he had signed up, Joey Kramer
Joey
from
Kramer. Absolutely.
Aerosmith.
The sort of OGs of the rock world. Certainly
Absolutely.
the American guys. Yeah. Yeah.
So
And
Lenny
Simon.
had, again, Lenny wouldn't
Yeah.
kind of discriminate against anyone. I mean,
Right.
if, say, black or white, male or female, if you could play, then he can. You had the opportunity to have a Zildjian endorsement. But I think it was the company as a whole. Just they weren't the face of Zildjian. It was Buddy Rich.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, Kind of
Yep.
Steve Smith. When he played with Journey, kind of like he was kosher because everybody knew he was a jazz drummer. If you know
Yeah.
what I
Yeah.
mean.
Yeah. Danny
But
Serafin
kind
sort of
kind of
yeah.
like the pure rock guys, they really didn't advertise.
Yeah.
That was one of the first things when I started working for Zildjian. I was like, why are you not advertising Neil Peart? I mean, at that time, still to this day. But back then in the 80s, I remember Rick Mattingly telling me stories. Whenever they put Neil on the front cover of Modern Drummer, they sold thousands of more copies than any other issue. I mean, he was
Yeah.
he
Oh,
was the
yeah.
biggest drummer on the planet, and it was like that in the UK too. He was enormously popular,
Yeah.
and he had a great relationship with Lenny, and but we just never advertised him. The Zildjian rarely did anything with any of those guys. So it wasn't just kind of signing up more rock guys, but it was also kind of shifting the image, the brand image
Yeah.
of the company,
Yep.
to say that, hey, Zildjian are great symbols, for rock too.
Yeah.
And they even had that time where, there was this sort of mentality that, the 2002, and then you remember when the Rude symbols came out?
Yes.
When the Rudes came out, and yeah, if you turned on MTV, it was, Tommy Lee, uh,
Alice
Van
Van
Halen,
Halen. Yeah.
Stuart Copeland.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
just saw that Peisty logo and that Rude logo. It
Yeah.
was like a 24-hour Peisty commercial.
Yeah.
Um,
Can I
but
just
they,
want to I was just going to make a comment about Steve Edelson, which just before I forget this, when you mentioned Steve, our dear friend, sadly no longer with us. But Steve opened the Peisty West Coast office in the early
exactly, yeah.
1982. And this is a funny thing. I had Jim Keltner on my show when we were talking. or this might have just been a conversation we were having, but I think it was on one of the podcasts when Jim was on, and he said something like, man, I don't even know how I got hooked up with Peisty. I don't even remember when I signed with him. And I said, I'm pretty sure it was Steve Edelson, you and Jeff. And he went, doggone it, I think you're right. He said, now that you say, he said, I forgot about Steve. He said, yeah, I think it was. And Steve, like you say, to his credit, was, there were all these drummers in Los Angeles, many of whom didn't even have an endorsement.
Yeah,
Jeff Beccaro, for example, and I think
yeah,
Jim did not have a Zildjian. He didn't have to necessarily poach them. He just said, "Hey, try these cymbals," and yeah. So
absolutely right.
yeah,
Yeah.
so it was a. Anyway, I didn't. I wanted to make that point about what you were up against when you moved to Los Angeles, and it was initially a bit of an uphill battle to sort of penetrate that market.
Yeah, the other thing is, Steve had done a very, very good job, um, in all the TV shows and film studio.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
back then you had, um, American Bandstand and Solid
solid gold. Yeah,
Gold, and
yeah,
they were all playing, they were all playing Paiste cymbals, and that's a good story. So I remember, so I became very friendly with Jan Parent, who was at that time he was the drum department manager at SIR in Los Angeles.
yeah.
And Jan used to take me to the filming of all these of all these shows, and um, one of the, I mean, everything was, lip sync, everything was,
Yeah.
playback. And I remember talking with one of the producers, saying, well, why you only have Paiste cymbals, etc. And he said, listen, the biggest problem for us, he said, drums are no problem. We can put pads on the drums, and that quietens them, and so no one can hear the drums. It doesn't feedback, doesn't come through the studio mics.
Yeah.
He said, but we always have a problem with cymbals, because we tell the drummers not to hit cymbals, but they're constantly hitting cymbals. We could put tape on them to deaden them, but that looks awful.
Yeah.
And he said, if you could come up with something that looks exactly like a real cymbal, but doesn't make a noise, he said, we'll start using the Zildjians. And that's when we came up with the idea of the playback cymbals,
The dead
you
cymbals.
know,
Yeah. Yeah.
the dead cymbals.
Yeah.
And, so that was two cymbals stuck together. And it looked exactly like a cymbal. And what would you do? You'd lathe down the top of one cymbal and you'd lathe down the bottom of another cymbal and then glue them together.
Yep.
And and then they looked exactly like a cymbal, but when you hit them, they didn't make a noise. So we
Yeah.
started making those, and then within a very short period of time, that kind of the word got out, and all the studios started using the Zildjian playback cymbals, and even for a lot of videos, when they were shooting videos for MTV, they would put the Zildjians up there, because again, for the same issue. So the drummers could hit them, but the sound wouldn't come through any of the recordings that they were doing.
Yeah. Yep. No, I remember that. Yeah. That was when I started there. That was, we were constantly, they were so in demand because MTV
Yeah,
was still such a huge thing in the
such a huge thing.
SIR and New York and LA and constantly needing, and we were happy to send them because it meant we were getting our product on TV. So,
Absolutely. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. No, it
Um,
was. It made a big difference, and we did. Again, when I moved to Zildjian West, that was the height of the heavy metal era. I mean, it was, all those, Rat and Motley Crue and all those bands. But, again, one of the first people that I met and got friendly with was Eric Singer.
yes.
Eric was, great drummer. And again, I owe a lot to Eric. He introduced me to kind of like a lot of the rock drummers in that at that time. and it was through Eric. Yeah, there you go.
He looks
That
exactly
was
the same too, by the way. This
he
is
does. I
it's
know. Yeah,
unbelievable.
that was my farewell party at from the Zildjian
So,
West when I moved back east.
wow,
So there's
look at
quite a cast of characters there.
that's a great
Um,
picture. And I just want to say, I met you for the first time, as we recalled last week when we were out at PASIC together in the summer of 1985, when I had moved out to LA to work for Simmons through our mutual friend Glenn Thomas, or actually Dave
yeah,
Levine, I think is who made the introduction, who was working for Simmons at the time. But
yeah,
anyway,
that was
you were saying, I didn't mean to derail your thought from Eric. I want you to
no, no,
finish
no.
this.
Say Eric introduced me. We would go and hang out at the Rainbow Bar and Grill, and he introduced me a lot of guys. That's how I met. Randy Castillo, who
Yeah,
was, as we were just saying, one of the greatest people I ever met, and a fantastic drummer. And and I became really, really good friends with Randy. He
yeah,
was just a great guy. Adored him. And Tommy Aldridge was out on the West Coast at that time. He had just started playing with White Snake,
hmm,
and it was funny that at that time David Coverdale kept asking Tommy and Rudy Zaro, the bass player, because Tommy and Rudy were planning a band on their own, and then uh, David Coverdale was kind of like begging them, and then suddenly that record, exploded. The one with the video with Tawny Katane on the car,
yeah,
and
yeah. I mean,
I
it was
can't remember the
huge.
name of the
Yeah.
tune there,
Here I
and
go again on my
exactly,
own.
and
Yeah,
so
yeah.
and it went totally mega, and of course Tommy and Rudy were like, yeah, okay, we'll join the band now. But I remember I hanging out with Tommy a lot, and Rudy was the nicest guy in the world. I remember going, he had an incredible house up in the Hollywood Hills. Um, he'd have all these parties up there, and Tommy used to bring me along to these Hollywood Hills parties with all these rock stars. It was crazy. It was good times, as they
Yeah,
say.
a
It
young
was a lot of
single
fun.
man living in Los Angeles
Yeah,
in
yeah.
1985. Boy, what was that like, I wonder? Hmm.
I mean, I was young, single, and it was a
Yeah.
lot of fun. It was definitely a lot of fun.
I was
But
not single when I
there
lived out
was,
there.
I mean, I again, I'd already met Vinny from the Zildjian Day in New York. So I would hang out with Vinny all the time. And there's one Vinny story that I want to tell. I'll tell it now before I forget, because a lot of people, there's lots of stories and legends about different people's like sight reading abilities, etc.
Yeah.
And I remember, so I used to hang out with Vinny a lot, and I remember one time he had a gig in the evening. One time there used to be a baked potato out in Pasadena.
Mm,
The
hmm.
one on Cahuenga is, the famous one has always been there. But for a while they had a second club out in Pasadena. And I remember that night Vinny had a gig there, and it was a like a fusion, jazz rock fusion, whatever. It was pretty complicated stuff. And Vinny had never played with this artist before, and he just got called to do this gig uh, out at the baked potato. And for whatever reason, I'd gone over there. We'd had lunch together, and we were hanging out. And the whole time, Vinny's going, "Listen, man, I got to go and shed these charts. Like, I just need an hour or a couple of hours, and I just got to shed these charts and make sure I'm cool with it." And we just kept goofing off and doing this and doing that. And he's like, "No, man, listen, I got to go and." I got to get ready for this gig tonight. I haven't even opened the book. I got to look at the chart. And of course, needless to say, we were just like goofing off the whole time. and we'd go off somewhere. I don't, and he never ends up even looking at the book. He never ends up.
Of
I'm
course.
like, Vinny, don't you think? And we drive together to the gig and everything, and he doesn't open the book once. He doesn't look at anything. And sure enough, and there's no, there's a sound check, but there's no rehearsal. And sure enough, and I'll remember this always, and I remember it so clearly because it was such a lesson for me in kind of what really separates the men from the boys, in terms of true greatness. Because so the gig starts, and Vinny's got like two music stands, and he's got all the charts laid out, and he's playing these tunes for the first time, you know live. I mean, playing them for the first time ever. That's all, it's all original tunes. And the crazy thing for me was, not only was he kind of like nailing everything, not making any mistakes. I mean, he was there, but he was putting his personality
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
into the music at the same time.
Right. He
You know,
wasn't just reading it. He was,
in
yeah.
real time, he wasn't just reading it, but he was making it, you know,
Yeah.
Vinny
That's what separates
in
the men from the
that
boys.
in
Yeah.
that way that he had. And it absolutely blew my mind, because I was watching him, and you think that he's going to be kind of like tentative, but again, it's that whole thing where he's always reading kind of several bars ahead
Yeah.
all the time. And he's got that kind of a genius brain where, and then that allowed him, and it was an incredible experience to witness it, because I know for a fact I was with him the whole day. He never opened those charts. He never look at a thing and then played it like that,
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
so much personality, and his putting his unique stamp on it. It was astonishing. It was one of the most astonishing things I've ever seen or heard.
But like you say, that is what separates the men from the boys. To the
Uh,
Steve, Gadd again. These guys that can, like you say, they can be several bars ahead, and so that they can, when they get to that point, they've already got the phrasing for it. Yeah, it is amazing. It's just
it
I can't
was
even I can't even imagine it
no, it was
personally.
it was and again, it was, I mean, I've seen Vinny play so many times, and you're always awestruck, but when you understood what he was doing as well, it was revelatory to me. I mean, I
Yeah,
remember it was like I am at the feet of a genius.
yeah.
Incredible, incredible.
Well, when we were talking last week at PASIC, or it might have been in a phone call we had, but I didn't realize, Colin, that you were only in LA just under a year. When I met you that summer, um, I I think I had seen you maybe a couple more times because I certainly knew who you were, um, and I just assumed that it was, like you had made such an impact out there. I assumed you were there for a longer period before you moved to Norwell. So I think that's, like I said, I mean, all the drummers that you came in contact with in that amount of time that you signed, or that you just really, um, really strengthened the relationship with out there. It's pretty fascinating stuff.
It was, yeah, and it was less than a year. Yeah, it
Yeah.
was, I say, from May 1985 to February of 86. But an awful lot happened, during that amount of time. And again, I had a ball. A lot of it was great when, a lot of my buddies were drum techs. Would not
Yeah.
not only would drummers come over, but guys from England. They would land in LA, and want to know where the best Indian restaurant was. And so I get to see a lot of the drum tech friends that I had from England. You remember Nuno that used to work for Yes?
I sure
Was it
do.
Alan
Yeah.
White's guy?
Yeah. Yeah. I got to know him really well. Yeah.
Great
New
guy,
no. This is new no. Yeah.
wonderful guy.
Great guy.
So I got to, you know, to I remember Gary Wallace coming over, with when he was doing the Power Station tour
Yeah. Yeah.
and hanging with him. They stayed in Los Angeles for like a couple of weeks, so they were seeing someone, from home, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and so that was great. Manny Elias from Tears for Fears,
Sure. Yeah.
again at that time, 1985, they were biggest
Huge.
band in the world.
Yeah.
The Thompson Twins, Boris Bransbury Williams, they all came over and they would stay in Los Angeles for a couple of weeks. So it was great. So I get to, see a bunch of my friends from the UK, and they'd have a friendly face to, kind of show
Yeah.
them around. It
That's
was
great.
it was a ball. It was a lot of fun. No, it was I say it was a pretty amazing time. Plus, back then all the studio guys were playing in the clubs, at that time. Um, so you go out and you see Vinny at the Baked Potato, or Tommy Breckline, or Alex Acuna. Chester Thompson used to play. David
Yeah.
Garibaldi. So I got to
Yeah.
see
Jeff too.
all
Jeff would. Yeah.
all these heroes.
Yeah.
Just playing in little tiny clubs. It was mind blowing. And of course, we cannot forget our very good friend Mr. Rick Marotta,
Yes.
who literally took me under his wing when I first moved to Los Angeles. For whatever reason, he took a shining to me, and I spent my first ever Thanksgiving at Rick Marotta's house.
That's
You know,
that's such a great story. That there he
he
is right
because
there on the right.
I didn't know what a Thanksgiving was. And I remember
Yeah.
Rick calling and saying, "Well, what are you doing for Thanksgiving?" He said, "I'm Thanksgiving. What's Thanksgiving?" He said, "Well, you're coming to my house." And of course, they had the like something a Martha Stewart style Thanksgiving, with every side dish and all the fixings and the biggest turkey you've ever seen in your life. And it was an incredible day, and I remember it well. And back then he had the DeLorean. So we would. I remember pulling up to these clubs in Rick's, with the gull, doors and everything. And he's just the
He's so
great,
subtle. He's just so
greatest,
subtle.
greatest guy in the world. They had a
He
lot
is.
of funny, funny, very funny times with Rick. God.
Yeah. But and I'll say, and this too, because you just saw him over the summer. He's to this day is one of the most generous, like when he, like you said, I mean, I can totally envision that. Like, what are you doing for Thanksgiving? You're not going to spend
Yeah,
it alone. You got to come to my house.
right.
And that's,
And he
he's a great
introduced
friend.
me to Steve Kahn, the guitar player. And at
Yeah,
that time
sure.
I was in my full Steve Jordan obsession. I loved all those Eyewitness records, and Steve Kahn was staying at his house, and Rick said, "Hey, come over, meet Steve Kahn." And Steve Kahn, I'm, become one of my best friends. He's
Yeah.
at my wedding. He was at my wedding. I stay in contact with him all the time.
Great guy.
Um,
Great guy. Yeah.
so, but other names I want to mention: Ian Wallace. That's how I met out at Zildjian West.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now Ian was playing Paiste, but
Right.
he'd always wanted to play, Zildjians. He's from the same part of London as me, so we hit it off. We were fast, became very very good friends early on. It was devastating when we lost him again. Just great 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 person. It was
Absolutely.
very
Yeah.
sad, but
Wonderful. And a fabulous drummer, and with a storied career, with Bob Dylan and Jackson Brown and
and he when I met him,
everybody.
he was doing Don Henley.
Don,
That
of
was the
course, Don Henley. Yes.
Boys of Summer tour he was doing.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And again, that was like the biggest record, out there at that time.
Right.
But
Right.
but
Right.
we had great fun with Ian. He was another, Brit abroad, so
Yeah.
he also showed me the ropes. But
Well, so when you moved, and we're obviously you spent many 20 something years at Zildjian, so there's lots of ground to cover, and I know we won't cover it all. But when you moved to Norwell, you were promoted, and they said we want to move you to headquarters in Norwell, Mass. And Was your job, did your position changed to a marketing position
Yeah, I
technically,
mean,
or?
and initially when I first moved to Norwell, I was primarily doing artist relations.
Mm, okay.
Again, kind of helping Lenny out.
Yeah.
Again, I
Yeah.
was always, very deferential and had much reverence for Lenny. And so I would go to so many shows with him.
Yeah.
And that was the time when the Boston Garden was kind of being renovated, so all the big shows were out at the Worcester Centrum.
Hmm. Yeah.
Do you remember that period? So
I do. Yeah.
that was a good old drive. So
Yeah.
I mean, there was you know a countless number of times that Lenny and I would drive out to the Worcester Centrum to see whoever was there. So I was always never wanted to kind of step on Lenny's toes in any way. So but again, Lenny trusted me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when I came to Lenny and said, "Hey, Lenny, this guy's really important. We should sign him up." It was he trusted me.
Yeah. Of
So
course. Yeah.
so you know it worked very well. So no, we worked very, very well together. It was, and then slowly but surely, yeah. Then I became kind of a product manager, and Chris Noblet, who had moved to the US also, and
Hmm.
that's why he wanted me to come over. Um, he wanted me to take over more of a product manager's position. Um, and again, I had, there was a lot of guys that I met, from Zildjian, UK. I should mention like Dave Mattox, who'd become, really, really good friend. Charlie Drayton, Vince Wilburn, Simon Phillips obviously was, the big name UK guy, used to do clinics with Simon. But Charlie Drayton I met when he was over. Um, he was playing with David Sanborn at the Rock Palast show in Germany,
Yeah.
and I'd gone over to that. I met him backstage, and that's also where I met Vince, who was playing with Miles, and Charlie and Vince have just become just true friends, and
Yeah.
obviously still in contact with them to this day. Um, we should tell some Armand stories too, John. I think if
Yeah,
don't
we should. We absolutely should.
we or did you plan to talk about him in a little while? So,
Yeah, no, I was definitely going to get to that, and I wanted to just
okay.
sort of, I wanted to just at least mention that your role had changed and that you were, responsible for. By the time you hired me in '89, you were the marketing guy, and it's
Yeah.
it's it's great to talk about Chris Noblet when you initially said, you remember Chris. It was hard to get a word in edgewise. When I came down for my interview, my first interview with you and then him. He talked the whole time. I don't think he asked me a question.
Yeah.
I think he figured you brought me in, so I was probably okay. And then he just went on and on and on, and I just thought like, well, yeah, this went well, like. He was
Yeah.
he is such a great guy, but
That was Chris.
yeah, yeah. But there's so many great Armin stories, and I'm gonna find a photo. Speaking of Armin, this is a favorite because it's got a lot of key characters in it. This was a visit that Vinny made to the factory in the early '90s,
Okay.
and Armin happened to be there, and John King, and I if I remember correctly, I think we took him to lunch at Chili's, Vinny, that is, and all sorts of hijinks ensued as they as they often
Yes, they
did
would.
with
Yeah.
Vinny in those days. And yeah, but Armin, yeah, but I would love for you to tell an Armin story because he, I
Well,
mean,
again, I think Armand is certainly become a legendary character, and I just feel so fortunate to have been able to you know to to meet him and get to know him, because he's certainly amongst the most very special people I ever met in my life, and I always think of the word charisma. It's kind of like you either have it or you don't.
Hmm.
And Armand just had this unbelievable charisma when Armand came into the room, then he immediately became the center of attention.
Yeah,
But he was the way he treated everybody. Whether you were a guy sweeping the factory floor, to one of the executives, the guy who you know drive the limo to take him to the airport, or you go out to dinner, and the way that he would treat the waitresses or whatever. I mean, he, he was just such a gentleman, and so sort of humble, and that really taught me a lot. I mean, here is Armand Zildjian, that the owner of the Zildjian empire, and he treated everybody with so much dignity and respect. and
absolutely.
and
Yeah.
and so my first my first real sort of meeting with him. So after I joined Zildjian in the UK, which was what, October of 1983, having been unemployed for a couple of weeks, but and then in January of 1984 they sent me to Norwell, to have a training session. So I'd never, it was the first time I'd ever been to the United States. It's January. There's snow on the ground, obviously on the South Shore, and at that time the only hotel nearby was the Sheraton Tara in Braintree. There
Oh
was no
yeah.
hotels in Rockland or anything down there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so here's me, this little nobody from England, and Armand, wants me to have dinner at his house. So to get to know me, or whatever. So I remember, I mean, and again, this is Armand friggin' Zildjian, and he drives me, and that's where they had the beautiful house, so what is it, World's End in
Yeah.
Hingham,
Yeah.
right
Yeah.
on the ocean. And his wife Andy, she, wonderful lady. She had immaculate taste, so it was all antiques. This is the most beautiful house,
Yeah.
and the exquisitely decorated and beautiful antiques everywhere. And Andy makes dinner, and it's just the three of us having dinner. And again, I'm pinching myself. It's like I'm having dinner with Armand Zildjian and his wife, and again, we're getting on great, and then after dinner, the drinks are flowing or whatever, and in the basement of that house, Armand had a drum room.
Hmm.
So after dinner, we're sitting around and having a little drink, and he's playing all this big band music and all. I mean, that was Armand's passion. He loved Buddy and all, and Maynard Ferguson.
Maynard Ferguson.
And
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
end up in the drum room downstairs, and he had all these. They were friends with the guy who made Vibes, so he had a bunch of
Oh yeah.
Vibes drum kits, and a bunch of
Grasso, whatever his
percussion
name was. Yeah.
instrument.
Yeah.
So it's like it's 11 o'clock at night, and we're down in the basement, and Armand's left. He's playing a drum kit, and I'm playing the drum kit and playing the
Right.
bongos, and I'm you know jamming out with Armand Zildjian. And that has literally been unemployed like 4 months before that, and now I'm in America for the first time, and I'm in a basement playing drums with Armand Zildjian. So, but what I always remember, the greatest thing was, so he didn't want to have to drive me all the way back to Braintree. So he's like, oh no, you'll just stay here the night and I'll take you in. And I'll always remember. So he shows me to the spare bedroom, and he says, oh, I'll get you a toothbrush and some stuff. And I remember he comes back in and he's got no shirt on. He's just got a towel around his waist.
I've
This,
never
this
heard
is
this.
this arm, and he's like, oh yeah, we've got you these. From when they would travel to Japan, they would have those little packs of toothbrush and
Yeah,
toothpaste that you got on the airplane.
yeah.
And he gave me some of like his old pajamas and stuff. And he was just the greatest
Oh,
guy in the world, and I'll never forget it. He's there, he's got a towel on, no shirt. He's like, yeah, here you go, you'll be comfortable here. Is there anything else you need? What can I get you? You
oh
want
man.
something before bed? And and it's like all of us, we would have walked off a cliff for Armand. You would have
Yeah,
followed him into battle. I mean, he
yeah.
was just the greatest guy.
Oh,
Just I adored him. Absolutely adored him. It was and you remember what it was like. You'd be in meetings with him, and I don't know if we've told this story, but a lot of people don't realize that he was very artistic,
yes. Yeah, yeah.
left-handed, and he would draw caricatures of people. Do you remember that?
I do.
You
Yeah.
know, you'd be sitting there in a meeting, and
Yep.
everybody's being terribly serious, and Armand would be scribbling away, and then he'd just kind of like put it in front of you,
Yeah.
this caricature of someone in the room, and you'd have to try not to laugh.
Oh,
You know,
absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
oh
Oh, he
God,
was
it was
such
it
a
was so funny.
such a mischief maker. He was just,
Yeah,
yeah,
and then you put the two of them together. You put Lenny and Armand together,
yeah.
and one and one equals like 100. I mean, they would just feed off of each other. And I used to do trips to New York with them, and I remember going to one of the drum corps finals. Just the three of us, and you just basically laughed the whole time. You never stopped laughing. I remember going to one of the drum corps finals, and it was in Madison, Wisconsin, and we got there, and it was like 120 degrees. It's the middle of summer,
Oh,
and we'd all showed up. We had long pants and everything. I remember there was an Army and Navy store, Army and Navy surplus store, like right next to the hotel. So Armin goes, "Come on, we're going over there," and he gets his American Express card, and he says, "Buy whatever you want." And I remember, so Armin bought a pair of like Bermuda shorts and a
yeah.
Hawaiian shirt and like a captain's hat, you know, and he had to, for the DCI, he had to give an award to someone. And he didn't buy any different shoes. So he had his dress shoes, like, dress shoes and black socks, and then
Right.
Bermuda shorts and a Hawaiian shirt
Hawaiian shirt.
and a captain's hat. And he's, walks down to give the award dressed like that. Is just the funniest thing.
Oh my God.
It
Yeah,
was
yeah.
hilarious. It was just the funniest thing.
So many, so many. Oh God, I know, I know.
Yeah.
I tell that story, and I'll leave out the end of it. But when Modern Drummer opened their offices in the must have been the early or mid '90s, they'd moved offices to a new place, and they had a big open house, and we all went down for the day, and it was you and me and Lenny and Armand, and might have just been the four of us. It was, but in any case, we spent an afternoon there, and then stayed in Manhattan, stayed at the Mayflower Hotel where we always stayed, and I remember we were in one of the rooms. And Lenny did the classic leaning against the wall and took a power nap. Do you remember that? Just
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
against the
He,
wall and just
he could
15
sleep
minutes. Yeah.
standing up. Yeah.
Sleep standing up. And then I think we went out with Kathy Rich for dinner that night. And yeah, and it was just a day full of just one hilarious thing after another.
Oh,
Just with the two of them, just with the two of them. It was just,
hysterical.
yeah. John
Absolutely
Sorensen is
hysterical.
watching, Colin. John Sorensen is watching,
Oh,
and he says,
Big
as is,
John.
yeah, Rob Wallace and Tom Myers. But Big John says, one meeting we had one meeting we had, Armin drew Paul Struble while we were sweating it. Yeah, I know. God, he was wired for just fun,
Yeah.
but,
But
but
again, as I always tell people, when it was time to be serious, he could be very, very serious.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And same with Lenny. Lenny, as we said
Yeah,
at PASIC, when it came to like knowing symbols and knowing sounds, there was nobody in the building that came near
no one
Lenny.
close. Yeah,
Yeah, no
yeah.
one. Yeah. And that includes you, Paul Francis, if you're watching this. Um,
We all learned from them. I mean,
yeah.
Armand could just look at a symbol and tell you what it was going to sound like. You
Yeah.
could just see from the shape, and how it felt. I mean, it was incredible. And as far as matching symbols, I think I've said that before. Lenny was the master in terms of putting
Absolutely.
I know, obviously Leon kind of took over from that, but Leon learned from Lenny.
Yeah.
Lenny had an incredible ear for music,
Yeah.
incredible ear for symbols. So we all learned from those guys. They were the master. But Armand, I mean, again, I remember being in our R&D meetings with Armand, and he'd look at it and know from the shape that it's not going to be right.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. He'd look at the profile of a symbol and tell you why it was going to sound, why it wouldn't sound good, or why it might sound good. But he could just look at it and tell you what it
Yeah,
was going to sound like, just looking
yeah.
at the profile. Colin, I wanted to show a photo that I think you'll agree it's one for you and I to be very proud of you and us with Elvin Jones at his 75th birthday in New York, which was just an event that if you remember it, you weren't there.
Hmm.
But if you remember the '60s, you weren't there. But I just you and I think we can share the the memory and be proud of the fact that years of us literally stalking Elvin when he would come to the Regatta Bar every year in Boston with his band, with the jazz machine. And I remember the first year we went, you said to me, "We've got to go see Elvin." I bought tickets. We've got to, we've got to try to. He had left Zildjian to go to Istanbul Symbols, and the germ of the idea for the Constantinople's. It was still maybe a year or so away. I think we were working on the orchestral versions, and the next project was going to be drum set symbols. But you had the great foresight to try to open this dialogue with Elvin and try to get him back to play Zildjian so that we could have him be one of the flagship Constantinople drummers. And I remember us going the first time, and we're in the Regatta Bar way early, like no one else is in there. And there's Keiko setting up Elvin's drums. And we introduced ourselves, and she wanted nothing to do with us. This is what I
Yeah,
remember. She was she
yeah,
was she was polite, but she said Elvin's taking a nap. He needs his rest. Maybe between shows, you can say hello to him. He can say a quick hello to you, but no, he's not going to come down and meet with you. So we just kind of went, okay. And we sat there. I think we ordered some food. And then I feel like it was 10 minutes later, Elvin comes down. She must have said, some people from Zildjian are here. And he said, I'm going to go meet them. And that to me, that was so groundbreaking because every year for the next 3 years, we went back almost the same time of year. And he would welcome us and greet us. And nothing changed for those first couple years. But eventually, got a phone call from Keiko and she said Elvin's ready to come back to Zildjian, and that was just such a great memory for me, for both of us to share. That.
yeah. Again, I think with Keiko, I think she was Elvin's protector. And I think they'd just been kind of burned so many times, whether it was by record companies or tour promoters or whatever. She was,
Yeah,
it's
skeptical and
again,
protective. Yeah,
it's all about trust, and I think we earned her trust, as it were. And I think with Elvin too, a very spiritual person, Elvin. I always used to say, I think, in another culture, he would have been like a shaman, Elvin,
yeah,
because there was this very unique spiritual thing that, you know, with Elvin that I always felt, he was so kind of acutely tuned to the vibrations around him, without sounding too pretentious, but he was a very unique person. and like a holy man to to me, the way he was. And I think it was when he started feeling that our intentions were genuine, as it
Hmm.
were. And that's kind of like opened the door to at least them be willing to talk. And again, no one can really remember what happened. There was some reason why he had a falling out
Yeah.
with Zildjian, and had started playing Istanbul. And
Yeah.
I don't think anybody really remembers why or what happened. Even Elvin, I
I
don't
don't
think.
think he did. Yeah, I think he even said that at one point. And I do have one more thing I was going to say, and this is a little, maybe a little self, serving to myself, and I apologize if it comes off this way. But I remember that first time meeting him, and my kids were like maybe 7 and 5 or 8 and 6 or something. And in the course of the conversation, because we had this wonderful conversation, I think I said, I have two small children, and I showed him pictures of Johnny and Danielle, who were maybe about that old at the time. And then a year later, it was like, was so crazy. Literally a year later, we hadn't seen or spoken with him during that time. We came back, we're sitting in the same spot, and he said to me, "How are them babies?" And I just remember, like, I wanted to cry. I really did. I wanted to cry. I was like, wow. I said, well, now that you ask, here's some recent pictures, but he
But
was so genuine, so, and like you say, like a philosophical, like he would, even just sitting there in a conversation, he would say these things that were so like you wanted to write it down and go, my
mm,
God, I gotta remember that, what he just said about, just living in the moment, or what something that he might say, and I have one more quick funny story, but and then I'm gonna.
and he was also very, very funny.
Oh, well, okay.
You
So
know.
do you remember? I think you will. We went to New York. Now, this was the year. The year was 1998, because it was the year that you produced the first Drummers Achievement Awards, which was in September of '98, and this was in the summer. And you and Craigie and myself. I don't know if Lenny came on this trip. Certainly, the three of us went to the Jazz Awards at Lincoln Center.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Do
yeah,
you
yeah,
remember
yeah,
this?
yeah.
And we had dinner with Max Roach at this
Yes.
Italian restaurant. And
Yeah.
Max had been to Zildjian maybe a few months or sometime before. And we'd gone to lunch at the Paparazzi Italian place. And Lenny had said at that time, Johnny, what was that wine we had? Why don't you order a bottle of wine? So I ordered, sheepishly. And I remember Max tried it and thought it was great. So when we went to dinner at this Italian restaurant, I remember he looked at me and he said, you order the wine. He had the wine list, and he said, why don't you order the wine? I went, oh God, boy, here we go. Anyway, but that's a side story. So we're at the Jazz Awards, and Elvin goes up to present an award to someone. And you know this story. He's up there, and just as he's about to start speaking, a fire alarm goes off, and the bell is ringing like ding, 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 and Elvin's speaking into the mic, and you can kind of hardly hear him. He's going, and and then finally he goes, uh, "Dinner is served." Oh my God, I will remember that for
Yeah.
the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Oh my
Yeah.
God,
No,
yeah,
I remember that.
yeah,
It was classic. I mean, he was hilarious.
yeah,
And so was Keiko. When you got the two of
yes,
them together, you remember how she used to constantly rag on him for eating cornflakes. Remember that?
Jonesy, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Why you eat that horse food? Horse food.
right. Oh my
And
God,
then you talk about the 75th anniversary. I don't know if you remember when, after the first set, or it could have been at the end. I don't know. We were up in the little dressing room in the Blue Note,
yeah, yeah,
and we'd given Elvin a very, very expensive bottle of cognac for his
yes,
75th birthday. Do you remember that? It was
yes,
like $1,000 bottle of cognac that we'd given him. So and the set's over, and he's like, oh, we got to open this. So he wanted to open it, and there's glasses, and
yeah.
he pours a glass for himself and everybody else, and he takes a sip, and he's like, he goes, $1,000 a bottle and worth every penny. it was so
Oh,
funny.
oh, he was.
Licking his lips. Oh,
Oh,
he was a classic guy.
well,
And and again, we were just talking about whenever he would come to play at the Regatta Bar, we'd always take him out for dinner, the night before.
yeah.
And then at that time, I don't know if I don't think Eric in the Evening is still going, but there was that jazz show that was on the radio. And it used to be on at like 11:30. So after we'd finished eating, and Elvin might have had a few glasses of red wine. He'd then have to go and do the interview with Eric in the evening, and trying to talk sensibly after we'd been, goofing around for the
Oh,
last,
and
you
having
know,
consumed more than a couple of glasses of wine. Yeah, he would then, I know. And I feel like a couple of times he'd give us a shout out. He'd say, I was just having dinner with my
yeah,
friends at Zildjian. And
Zildjian.
yeah.
And then, do you remember the time when NPR interviewed him on the radio for that was for the American Drummers Achievement Awards, I think.
Yes, yes.
And he's on, they wanted to interview him quite early in the morning. So he's doing the radio interview and everything. They get him on the phone and he's talking and it all goes well. And then I think almost immediately, we called him
Yeah.
to say, oh, great interview, Elvin, thank you so much for doing it. It was a great job, And he goes, yeah, it's just as well it wasn't a TV interview because I was sitting there at the breakfast table in my boxer shorts. It
Oh,
was so funny.
oh
It
my
really
God.
was.
Yeah. Him and Armin and Lenny were cut from the same cloth. I mean, it was just like,
Yeah.
it was
Well,
just,
there's that great photo somewhere of the three of them. Remember, Armand had all those like different hats in
yes.
his
Yeah.
office,
Yeah.
and there's like Armand's wearing the limo driver's hat, and Elvin's got like a British, bowler hat on,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
then Lenny's got like a rabbi's hat on or something. The three of them are just sitting there like perfectly normal, you
Oh,
know,
yeah.
with their hats on. Gosh,
I couldn't find that
incredible
photo. That's a
people,
classic. This is a great
classic.
photo of speaking of Max, of you and Max and Lenny. That's a really, really great photo. And this might have
Yeah,
been at
it's
Paparazzi. It
precious.
looks like it could have been.
It's no, it was at Bella's.
It was
Remember,
Bella's.
was
Okay.
it Bella's? Around, was that the name of the restaurant? It
Maybe that's
was.
where we had lunch that day where I anyway, yeah, yeah, yeah,
It's- Then he would have his swordfish with puskanuska sauce or whatever it's called. So,
yeah, yeah.
no, that was at Bella's. That was in the foyer of Bella's. Definitely, Chip Stern took that photograph,
Okay. Yep.
and there's another very similar photograph of Max, and Lenny that I took. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's precious. Again, well, meeting Max Roach, again, it's like royalty. You
Yeah.
meeting someone, very, very special.
Well, Colin, I want to as we sort of wind things down, I want to just touch on a couple of things that um what I would think to be. I mean, you had many accomplishments during your time at Zildjian. And I know we're not really touching on some of the things you've done since then, but when I joined the company in '89, it was in the midst of this really great advertising campaign that you were spearheading, which was this people that were around at that time will remember it was more of the world's greatest drummers play Zildjian than all other brands combined, I think was the headline consistently. And you showed, different drummers doing things outside of playing drums. And it was so, I think, unique and groundbreaking. And I just remember seeing, for the first time seeing one going like, that is such, and then, month after month, you'd have a different one with different
Yeah.
drummers. And it was such a great idea. And I guess my point to all this is what a great time, when print advertising was actually, when it actually meant something, first of all. But these ads were so incredibly impactful back then. I mean, the back page of Modern Drummer magazine, high circulation.
Well,
And
the original campaign was we took three single page black and white ads in Modern
that's right.
Drummer.
That's right. That's
And
right.
they would be consecutive right hand page ads, and then on the back cover they would all come together. So each of the ads, the black and white ads in the magazine, had two drummers, and then all six of the drummers would be on the color ad on the back. with a particular range of symbols that kind of tied it all together. So,
Right. Okay, that's right. I do remember that now. Yes.
and I
Yeah.
remember Steve was the only one we couldn't get a new photo of. So that was from that campaign where I think you wait you that was you got him the something or other from when they do that photo shoot near Wurlitzer's where you were
Exactly.
working.
I was working there in 1982 when Zildjian did that photo.
Yeah.
Yeah. It and
And
yeah.
to me that photo and that ad and that poster is what is one of the greatest drumming ads ever done. That was before my time. I'm not taking credit for it. It was the advertising agency was Cipriani Kramer,
Yeah.
and they
Yep.
used to use a photographer in Boston called Al Fisher.
Hmm.
And that photo of Steve with the where they kind of like spritzed him to make him look like he's was sweating and he had the towel around his neck,
Exactly.
and it was Al Fisher who did the front end, and to me that was one of the greatest drumming ads ever done. I mean, I had that poster on my wall, you know, forever. I mean, it
I
was
had
an
one of those too.
incredible photograph of Steve.
Yeah. I'll just tell you, and I think I told you the story. Jerry Donegan and Lenny and Armand and Rab, I think, all came into Wurlitzer because the studio was literally next door to where on Newbury Street in Boston
Right.
to
Yeah.
Wurlitzer. And I knew Jerry better than all the guys. I knew Lenny quite a bit from seeing him, around in some clinics they'd done at the store, but I knew Jerry because I'd called Jerry to order cymbals. He was the sales manager, and he came in and he said, "Hey Johnny, we're doing a photo shoot with Steve Gadd next door. Um, could we borrow some cymbals? I think they brought some anyway, but could we take some cymbals over?" He said, "If you want to meet Steve, put some cymbals in a bag and come on over, and you can meet Steve." So I go over there, and Lenny was actually the one that said, "Hey, yeah, Johnny, hi, thanks, yeah," and brought me up a spiral stair. There's like a spiral staircase up to like where the dressing room was, where Steve was, and they had a spray bottle and they were spraying him down to make him look sweaty, and Steve has no recollection of this, of course, but but I met him, and I just remember, like, I was 21, almost 22 years old, and I had, in the last couple of years, had really gotten into him. Like, he had just like changed my whole life in terms of drummers that I'd been listening to up till that time. And
He did for everyone.
yeah, and I was like, it was a surreal moment for me to actually be me. And he was so nice and so soft spoken, and I had these gold drumsticks necklace, and he went, "Wow, man, these are cool. Where'd you get those?" And this girl that I was dating at the time had given them to me, and I almost took it off and said, "Here, take it." But yeah, and then that as you say, that photo, I mean, that ad
Amazing.
became really just
Because again, back then, Steve,
eponymous.
he
Yeah,
wasn't in a lot of ads.
right,
I mean,
right.
growing up in England, I didn't even know what Steve Gadd looked like. You know,
Yeah,
I didn't
yeah,
know if he was black, if he was white. Well, I had no idea. I remember eventually there was some sort of feature on him in Downbeat magazine where I saw a photo and saw what he looked like. But I had him on all these records, which I just absolutely worshipped him. And when I came over for the first Zildjian day in New York in 1984, that I didn't meet. That's the first time I met Vinny, but I didn't meet Gad then, even though he played on that. But I think I've told you the story when he arrived, Lenny had to go and get him and bring him, and I think Duke was just a baby at that time,
yeah, yeah,
and we were all in the dressing room. And again, this is 1984, so Steve Gadd, not only amongst drummers is a god, but amongst all other musicians, and there were a bunch of other New York guys that were all there, and I remember it was like the parting of the Red Sea when Steve showed up, and the kind of the crowd in the dressing room all were hushed, and the seas parted, and everybody moved aside, and Steve and Carol, holding Duke as a little baby, they kind
mm,
of like walked through. He might have stopped and said hi to someone, I'm not sure, but he was just this mysterious figure, as it were. So this photo, actually the first time I properly met Steve, and that was backstage at Jonathan Swift's in
Harvard
in
Square.
Cambridge,
Yeah,
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 Harvard Square in Cambridge, and he was playing with the Gads Gang,
yeah.
the first incarnation of the Gads Gang, with Cornell Dupree and Eddie Gomez, Richard T, and yeah, Armand Zildjian took that photograph.
Wow.
So that's little goofy me going, "Oh my God, it's Steve Gadd, it's Steve Gadd," and who knows what Lenny's whispering in Steve's ear.
Yeah, yeah. I know.
But
That's
that was the first time I met Steve, and then after that, I did get to do you got get to do a good few clinics with him and traveled with him to different places and got to know him a little better, and we'll forever be bonded because we had the same birthday,
I was gonna say, same
different
birthday.
year, but same birthday.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
and
That's such a
again,
great photo right there. Like,
and he was just just incredible guy, just wonderful. Again, I know for all the accolades and everything, but I think Steve, that his influence, you can never overstate his influence on the modern way that people play drums. I mean, he really did. I think he had more influence than anybody.
yeah,
Back then in those days, he completely redefined the way you played the modern drum kit. I mean,
yeah, yeah.
it's just no question.
And as influential as Billy was, is, and Neil Peart and all these Tony, so many, like you say, I think with Steve, you can sort of measure it by, I hate to say people that imitated him, but but it became such a thing to sound like him, to play like him and sound like him. Um,
Yeah, yeah, and and even then, you know, eh, even though people, kind of their style evolved, you kind of knew where it was,
yeah,
where it was coming from, in terms of that of the way that he played,
yeah,
and again, he was a supreme musician who happened to be a drummer.
yeah,
His
yeah,
musical sensitivity, ultimately, I think, aside from all his innovations and the things that he did on the drum set that no one else had done before, it's just the sheer musicality of of everything that he did, and
yeah,
everything always served the music first. Um,
exactly. Yeah,
uh, you know, just identified him as just kind of in a category all of his own.
yeah. Well,
I mean,
I'm gonna, I'm
amazing.
gonna, I want to show a few more photos. We were just talking about PASIC a little while ago, and this is such a great photo that you hadn't seen, which I was happy to share with you. But
Yeah,
this was PASIC '92 in New Orleans,
yeah, yeah.
and our friend,
And
yeah,
sorry, go
I was
ahead.
going to say our friend, the late Mike Morse from who was at one point my counterpart at Zildjian West, the artist
Yeah.
relations, who took basically was hired when you moved to Norwell.
I hired
You
Mike.
hired Mike, yeah,
He was the drum department manager of Guitar Center on
yeah.
Sunset,
Alan
who
Morse,
at that time had only just moved to the big store. They
yeah,
used to have a smaller store across the street, and and I hired Mike to replace me. Yeah,
yeah. And it's funny seeing he's wearing a 370th T-shirt, which wouldn't have been until the following year, but we had those shirts made up early, and I remember we were handing them out in November of '92 for the following year. But anyway, but the year was definitely 1992 in New Orleans. In Treelock, we were talking about this was just such an incredible event because Treelock Gertu just completely, like, it was this almost out of body experience that you felt when he played. And I remember the room, just, we talked about this the other day, just the
yeah.
collective.
He got like a 20-minute standing ovation.
Yeah,
It was amazing. And again, that's one of those kind of proud moments for me because it was, you know, I wanted Treelock to do PASIC.
yeah.
It was me who brought him over to do it because again, I was familiar with him from, from Europe and
John
from
McLaughlin, and
playing
yeah,
the John McLaughlin trio and Oregon and everything, and
Yeah.
so it was, again, the PAS people, they had no idea who's this tricycle guy, you know, and and his solo, and he started off so quietly with the
Yeah.
with the gongs in the water and the egg shakers, and then built it up to this incredible crescendo where he played his unique drum set type thing, and I was like, never been so proud. I remember just the reaction from the audience and how people went
Yeah.
absolutely bananas after his that first opening performance that he did. That was really special. I always remember that he got an ovation, standing ovation live, that I've never witnessed before at a PAS. It was unbelievable, and quite
Yeah.
right too.
Yeah.
You
And I
know,
think, and I think
the
it was
great
a year,
musicians.
yeah, a year or two later, we got him to the Modern Drummer Festival. And it was a similar situation to where, um, I think what you getting him to PASIC, in a sense, broke the ice to where we could approach Rick Van Horn and the people at MD to
Yeah,
have him do the festival. And it was an equally successful, you know, stealing the show situation to where there's just something so special about, what he does when he performs. And it's just like his
yeah, and,
soul.
and it and it was so original.
Yeah.
Again, there's more. I think we're exposed more now to Indian rhythms and than we were back then, and the way
Yeah.
he kind of integrated it with the sort of Western style. I guess you can call it a drum set. It really wasn't, but with where he was, fusing sort of Indian rhythms with Western style rhythms, and yeah, no, it was breathtaking.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it
And
was
a
great,
very, very funny man. Very, very funny man.
very funny man.
Very funny man. Well, I'm sensitive to your time, and I'm gonna just sort of breeze through a few more photos that I want to share with everybody. And when this becomes an audio podcast, I apologize to all of those who can't see these pictures because there's some pretty special photos that we're showing during this show. So watch the YouTube video and get the full effect. There's some really classic ones that you sent me. This one with you and our friend Vinny Colaiuta and Tim Landers. And was this from Koblenz, Colin? Was this
No,
from,
that's the
oh, New York,
New
New
York
York.
from
Okay.
1984.
Okay.
So,
That's
but
right. Yeah.
but now I see. I'd already met Tim Landers at the Frankfurt Fair in February of that year.
Hmm.
So Tim had come over with Steve Smith, who had brought who was doing a European tour with Vital Information.
Hmm.
So again, it's 1984. Steve Smith's, again, one of the biggest drummers in the world with Journey, the height of their success. And he basically he put his jazz rock band together, Vital Information, with Dean Brown, God
Oh,
rest his
yeah.
soul,
Yeah. Yeah.
and Dave Kukowski, and um, um, and Timmy Landers playing bass, and so they had played at the Frankfurt Fair, and that's where I got to know Tim. And then they came to London the week after Frankfurt, and I remember they were staying in some hotel in Hampstead. So I spent a lot of time, driving them around all over, my hometown, and showing them all the different spots. So I already knew Timmy, and had gotten quite friendly with him. Incidentally, that's another Armand story about how I first met Steve Smith.
Mm.
At the Frankfurt Fair, we always used to stay at like either the Intercontinental or the Frankfurter Hof. I think it was the Intercontinental this year. And Armand would always have like the presidential suite. So Armand always, after the Frankfurt show, he would want everybody to come back to his room. So after the show ended, we'd all end up in the suite, and Armand would have some, appetizers and some drinks and all kind of stuff. And I remember, going back to the suite one time, and I can't remember what it was. I think Chris Noblet's like, oh, Steve Smith's here, and I was like, oh wow, I'm going to meet Steve Smith, and I'm like, well, where is he? And I don't know. So I can't remember, but anyway, it turns out. So I go into Armand's bedroom, and another story of Armand with not many clothes. Armand's in his undershirt and boxer shorts, and he's having a rumble on the bed with Steve Smith, and they're like
Wrestling, right?
wrestling, rolling about on the bed, and
Uh,
and they're laughing and goofing around. It's the funniest thing in the world, and I'm like, what is going on? I can't, they started off arm wrestling or something, but it ended up with a full,
oh
like
my
rumble,
God.
and they're rolling about on the bed. Steve's laughing and Armin's laughing. It was the funniest thing. That
Oh,
was my introduction to Steve Smith. And
yeah,
and then after that, again, we became fast friends. I speak to Steve still in touch with him all the
yeah,
time. He's
yeah.
wonderful,
Well,
wonderful, another wonderful human being.
yeah, you made that point earlier too, which is so true that, so many of these guys, um, they're true friendships that you make, that, I've been away from Zildjian for coming up on 13 years and you longer than that. Um, but the relationship that you made or have with Steve, it'll be until forever. I mean, it's just he'll send a text with a video link and
Yeah.
YouTube link, and I want to show another quick photo. This of a Vinny photo that I think is great. This is from my wedding, which was 2001, and incidentally, I'm going to mention something in a second, but this this is just this
Oh,
beautiful
I
woman.
don't remember that.
You don't. Well, I went through. I probably never sent it because we've got a pile of wedding photos that I've never scanned. So I went through. I'd seen it a few times, and I got to scan this. I
Oh,
sent it
that's
to. So that's Joe Testa on the left.
yeah,
Everybody, it's the Fonz who
yeah.
is now the VP of Artist Relations for Zildjian and Vic Firth, but was the Yamaha Artist Relations Manager at the time, and Vinny and Colin and Colin's beautiful wife Marianne.
My beautiful wife, Marianne. My
Yeah,
gosh,
at
that's an
my wedding.
amazing photo.
And it's just the look on Vinny's face and the
Yeah.
look on your face is hilarious. So I had to show that. And there's,
Oh, that's great.
yeah, and
Oh,
I'll send you these,
you'll
Colin.
have to
Yeah,
send me that.
yeah.
I haven't got that. I
This is
got,
a,
I say I don't often speak with Vinny, but we text. Like
yeah,
out of the blue, he'll send me some like crazy picture of,
yeah.
it,
I'm going to text this to both of you guys. This one too. This is, you know, probably Vinny making fun of my Italian, relatives that were at the wedding or something, "Ah, boo, boo, boo." But,
yeah, I had so many good times with Vinny. I remember, being at Zildjian West, and we'd go out to dinner somewhere, and then he'd have some cassette or some rough mix of some record that he just played on, and we'd sit in the parking lot and listen to it, and just incredible. If there's any Vinny fans out there, make sure you've heard the Bill Myers record Images.
oh yeah, I love
Me
that.
is I
86
remember
or something, 87.
when I
Yeah.
remember being in his car and he was dropping me off at my apartment and he's like, "Oh, I just recorded this as a," and to me that's one of, I mean, he has so many incredible performances. I just got the Zappa Halloween um, box set. Um, was it 78 box set that is crazy.
Mm, yeah.
And but yeah, anyway,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
isn't this photo with the story with your son? Was it that?
No, this
Isn't
this
that?
was this
This is
is
not
about
backstage at Great Woods.
no, this was at the Worcester Centrum. And
Oh, okay,
Steve happened to be in town for something, and I said, or maybe the day we I told him up front, I said I'm going to see Dave Matthews, and he'd never met Carter before. And
right.
and we brought him to the show, to the Worcester Centrum, hung out with Carter afterward. And I remember Steve at the time, I remember him saying to me, "Yeah, I want to see if we can somehow get on like as an opening act for the Dave Matthews Band with get Vital Information kind of on the jam band circuit," which was a great idea. And Carter said to him, I think the first thing he said is, "Oh my God, Steve Smith, I can't believe I'm meeting you. My band Secrets used to play a bunch of your songs. And so like Carter was like this big fan of Steve, and you know, they connected there. And but yeah, so that other show you're talking about was maybe a year earlier.
Do you remember um, how we signed Carter? I remember you asking me to come into your office, and you said, Check this out. This is some
Yeah.
guy just sent me their new record. It's a guy called Carter Beauford, and he's looking for a Zildjian endorsement, and it was their like the
Like,
first record that he
yeah, or
recorded,
even like a demo, I think it was.
or
Yeah.
I think you're right. I think it was a demo,
Yeah.
and I remember, and we're like, oh my god, and I'm like, yes, sign him.
Well, and you know what? I remember telling Carter this story too. I had to be honest. I said, when I heard the fiddle, I wasn't, I'm like, I don't know about this band, but my God, this drummer is a monster. Like
It
it's
was
a
crazy. Yeah,
crazy
I
monster
remember that.
drummer. Yeah. Yeah.
I remember that
And
as one of those things. I just remember you saying, "Come into my office. I want you to hear this record," and I'm like, "Oh my god,
yeah.
this guy's a bitch. You got to,
Sign
yes,
him up.
sign him
Yeah.
immediately."
Don't.
You know,
Yeah. I know. I was like
it was a lot easier
1993.
back then. So
I know. I think about it. It was, I wouldn't want to be doing that job now, trying to
no, no,
cut through
definitely
all
not.
the layers of it all. But Colin, we could go on and on and on, and we'll have to do something again down the road to sort of part two to this because there's so much more to talk about. But I do want to mention also quickly that some of the photos that I used here today were from Lissa Wales, our dear friend. And I want to thank her sister Mary and Carlos Guzman, who kind of manages all these photos, for letting us use them. And thank you guys, and thank you, Mary Wales, for keeping Lissa's memory alive. And so these are beautiful photos.
Well, before we end, I do a couple of shout outs. I've got to mention Peter Erskine, who again, I was literally the world's biggest Weather Report fan. I remember I used to see Weather Report every time they played in London. I remember seeing them 1978 at the Hammersmith Odeon on Peter's first tour. There was one of the most, that was Jacko at his absolute peak. That was one of the most incredible concerts I ever saw. And then when I got to know Peter, I remember going to, would often go to his house in Santa Monica, and he'd give me all these bootleg tapes and all this, like his backstage pass from Weather Report and all this
Wow.
Weather
Yeah.
Report memorabilia. And again, I like pinch myself. I mean, when he produced the birthday concert thing, he was playing me all that and all those tapes that later came out as the legendary live tapes. He'd given me like rough bootlegs of it's like, shh, can't
I
copy,
remember
don't,
you
not for
playing
anyone.
those. Yeah, I do. I remember you
And,
playing those in your car. Yeah.
so that was like a dream come true. And Dennis is very, very important figure in my life. Mr. Chambers was,
Yeah.
again, we talk about lifelong friends. I'll never forget seeing him live for the first time. That again was life altering when he was playing with SCO. The first tour he did with them, I saw them at Jonathan Swift, so he's playing the yellow Slingerland kit,
Hmm.
and that was just mind blowing. Just completely blew me away. And from that moment forth, I was, world's number one Dennis Chambers fan, and again, great, great, great friend. And have to mention when you talk about friends and loyalty and people that stick with you through thick and thin, Mr. Adam Nussbaum, I have to
Yes.
mention my
Yeah.
very, very good friend Adam. Yeah, there's
Absolutely. Yeah.
this at the NAM show with Dennis. Ah,
Yeah.
great
Um,
guy. And
Adam.
and and
Yeah.
he played in Hilton Head. He played near here back in April. And it's like I hadn't seen him play for a while. And it was like seeing him play the first time all over again.
Yeah.
Blew me away. He
Can
was
I
incredible.
can I just tell a quick Dennis story, and which involves you, of course. So you had I'd been to interview for the Zildjian job a couple of times, and basically we had come to terms with it. And it was maybe the spring of 1989, and my start date was going to be May 1st. I was working for Drum Workshop. Even though I was living in Boston, I was still working for Drum Workshop in California. So I was trying to make the transition smooth for Don Lombardi. So I had about a month between when I officially was hired and when I was going to start. So anyway, long story short, you called me one day and said, John, it's Colin. Dennis Chambers. Dennis Chambers is playing tonight at the Regatta Bar with Mike Stern and Bob Berg, and Lenny and I are
Lincoln
going. And
Goings.
yeah, and Lincoln Goins on bass, and you have to come. Have you ever seen Dennis? I said no. I've spoken to him on the phone when while I've been at DW, but I've never met him. I'd love to meet him. So I came to the show, and it was the same thing you just said, Colin. I remember sitting there with you and Lenny. And that was the night Lenny yelled during the drum solo, "Pay that drummer more money." Do you remember that? I'll never forget it. It
Yeah,
was like it's
yeah.
etched in my brain.
Well,
But Dennis,
I-
yeah, yeah. I mean, it was completely life changing to see him play. And then during the drum solo, when he was doing his classic, playing
yeah,
the hi hat and the double pedal, the double bass drum at the same time, and the towel, like, you know,
yeah. A
the
bottle of
ninja
water.
thing.
Yeah,
Yeah. And it was unbelievable. It had the same effect on me. And,
yeah.
and every time after that, really just,
And again, I remember going up to the modern drummer people, and Dennis had given me had a. This was before Blue Matter came out. He had a tape of a live performance, and I remember sitting and made Bill Miller and Rick Van Horn like listen. I just said, listen to this guy, and that was and that what led to him being on the Modern Drummer Festival.
yeah, yeah.
And
There's,
and again, the Buddy Rich Memorial Scholarship concert, the one that Zildjian did, the second one,
yeah, yeah.
that was I
That was you that, yeah.
it was me that said, no, if we're going to do this, then Dennis has to be on the bill.
Yeah. And, as it turned out, he didn't make any sort of an impact on that at all. I mean, yeah. I mean, that was life changing for him. I just remember as the guy that was, booking clinics, every dealer after that wanted Dennis Chambers. I mean, it was
Right.
just, we
Yeah.
want to get this guy. And Dennis used to laugh about it, how, he'd been, a professional drummer at that point for 25 years. And that it's, the fact that people were just kind of discovering him was almost like a little humorous, it seemed. He was like, yeah, I've been doing this for,
Yeah. I
since I
mean,
was five.
there's a video of him on YouTube and he's 18 years old playing with the Brides of Funkenstein.
Hmm.
And he's
Yeah.
already Dennis.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's
Fully formed.
ludicrous
Yeah.
what he's playing.
Yeah. I
But
want to,
I think there was something about the Schofield band that kind of did kind of, you know, really give him a chance to kind of take everything to to another level. Between the groove side of things, where groove for days, and then his speed and the
power.
technique that he
Yeah.
had, and the precision and clarity. I mean,
Yeah.
mind
And
blowing.
yeah. And I was going to show one more photo that we would absolutely be remiss if we didn't show. And that was,
Uh,
you had such a great friendship with Tony. I know he just adored you. He trusted you. He valued your counsel. And, we lost Tony so young, but we can treasure those moments that we had with him. Um,
yeah, that it was
yeah.
that was devastating. He was such a special person.
Yeah.
He was such a unique individual. You know, and again, without getting morbid, the tragedy so much was, he'd had obviously a very difficult, upbringing, and difficult childhood, and he'd had you know some uh, you know tempestuous relationships, shall we say.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
he finally met Colleen,
I know.
my dear friend Colleen, who I'm in contact with regularly to this day. they were soulmates. They were, they truly were soulmates. And it was like Tony had profoundly found this kind of supreme peace and happiness,
Yeah.
in his relationship with Colleen, and then
That's,
tragedy
yeah.
strikes. I,
That's,
I,
yeah.
I remember him. Colleen told me the story once. I guess the first time she had dinner with Tony and Armand and Lenny, that Tony took Armand and Lenny aside and was like, okay, this is my bride, this is my wife. She's a lady, you guys better behave.
Oh, yeah.
And it's funny. And Colleen laughs when she tells the story because she was as much fun, if not more, than anybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
But Lenny was so Tony was so protective of her. He's like, you guys, you, you better behave yourself.
Oh, that's great. That is so great. Well, we'll definitely we'll end on a high note with that. And
Yeah,
Colin, this has been so great.
as Vinnie Colaiuta said, to quote Vinnie, Tony Williams is the genius of the drums, and never a truer word was
Yeah.
spoke. He truly was. He
Yeah.
was fantastic.
Yeah. Thank you for being here. This has been so great. We've had such great response from everybody watching. And we really just, it's touched the tip of the iceberg with all these stories and memories. But
I just saw a text from Dave Mattox just popped up. So
oh, Dave was watching, yes.
My good friend DM.
And Steve White was watching and had to run, but this has been wonderful. So many great memories, he said. So thank you, Steve. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And a big hand for my dear friend and my mentor, Colin Schofield, Colin, I want to thank you again for
That's
all that you did for me personally, and not just hiring me, but all that I learned from you, working with you and for you all those years. I would have never been equipped, to work in the business without knowing you and learning from you. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate that, John. And you know, kind of hiring someone to essentially take over, with Lenny was a big decision, and there was a lot riding on it. So thank you for making me look good for all those years, because you were the right guy for the job, as history has shown, and more than knocked it out of the park. So
Thank you.
that was
Thank you.
that was it was an easy decision, but it was the right one, clearly. So thank you for all the kind words. Appreciate
Thank
it,
you. Thank you. All
and
right.
wish you much continued success with your Live from the Drum Room podcast. Fantastic
Thank you.
second career.
I
I'll
appreciate it. Thank you again.
regularly tune in.
Well, yeah, thank you. And thanks for being part of it. And again, thanks everybody for watching today. And a big hand for Colin. And we will see you soon. Colin, hang with me if you would. I'll end the stream and we'll say
Okay.
goodbye in the room. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon. All right, that's my show. If you enjoyed it, give it a like, leave me a comment, and please subscribe to my YouTube channel. You can also download the episodes on all podcast platforms. And please visit my website, livefrommydrumroom.com, for upcoming shows and information on purchasing Live From My Drum Room t-shirts and hoodies. 100% of the proceeds go toward a scholarship I've created with the Percussive Arts Society. The link is also in the show notes. And you can contact me through my website or at livefrommydrumroom@gmail.com. And remember, no drummers are harmed on any show. And drummers, when in doubt, leave it out. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And I'll see you again real soon.